The alien council, in their towering palace of gleaming chrome and high-tech displays, sat in mockery of Earth. The galaxy had been under their control for eons, and to them, humanity was nothing more than a forgotten relic unworthy of even a second glance. The council members gathered around the holographic table, their voices dripping with arrogance. "Do you think they'll actually respond?" One of them sneered, his eyes glinting with amusement. "After all these years of silence, Earth still dares to send a message. It's almost cute." The council's laughter filled the room, a sound that echoed in the vast chamber. They had heard rumors, of course whispers about human advancements, about their strange and primitive technologies. But none of them believed a word. Earth was insignificant. A weak, isolated planet with no power to stand against the might of the Empire. They had no weapons, no ships, no real infrastructure. The idea of humanity becoming a threat was laughable. "Send our scouts. Let them see if anything has changed," another council member suggested, rolling his eyes. "They'll come back laughing. We'll ignore their signal. Another few hundred years, and they'll finally be erased from the records." But no one was prepared for what would happen next. Earth, still clinging to its silence, had remained dormant. But now, the time had come for humanity to speak, to show the galaxy that their silence was not submission. It was something far more dangerous. The Council, in their blind arrogance, continued to mock the idea of humanity fighting back, but something changed. The mocking laughter died down as a single sharp beep broke the stillness. The officer's face turned from smug indifference to sudden confusion. "We've received a message," the officer stated, almost as though he couldn't believe his own words. "From Earth?" one of the council members asked, barely able to stifle another laugh. "I thought we agreed to ignore them." The officer nodded, his fingers already flying over the controls, trying to decode the strange transmission. After a brief pause, the screen flickered to life. On it appeared a human no more than a silhouette against the harsh glare of a distant star. There was no formal greeting, no pleasantries. The message was simple: "You will regret this." The council members froze. The room was silent for a long, unbearable moment. The arrogance that had once filled the room was now replaced by a creeping unease. It was the first time in centuries they had been forced to confront the unknown with
real, tangible fear. Regret?
One council member sneered, trying to mask his unease. What can they possibly do? They are nothing. They can't. Before he could finish, the screens around the room suddenly flickered. The officer's hands trembled as he tried to stabilize the system. "Sir, we've lost all communication." A cold chill spread across the council as they exchanged nervous glances. The officer frantically toggled switches, his face pale. "I can't establish a connection. Every frequency. Everything's down." "That's impossible," a high-ranking council member muttered. "We control the galaxy's communication systems. No one has the power to block us." Suddenly, a strange humming sound filled the air. The council members turned toward the outer walls of their chamber. The hum grew louder and the ground beneath them trembled. At first it was subtle, but then it intensified. Without warning, the entire palace, along with the nearby fleet, was rocked by an explosion that sent waves of shock through the building. The council members scrambled to their feet, eyes wide with disbelief. Outside the palace, the fleet began to fall into chaos. Their communication systems, their most advanced technology, were completely jammed. Panic spread like wildfire across the ranks. "What's happening?" one of them yelled, clutching at his armrest for support. "Why are we losing control?" From their position in the command room, they could see their ships once proud, imposing, and seemingly invincible now trembling in space. They were being attacked, not with advanced weapons, not with technological superiority, but with something far simpler, The humans had somehow disabled their fleet, incapacitating their ships with a strike that seemed more like brute force than precision. Could they? Another member gasped, unable to comprehend the situation. Something is happening, the comm officer said in a low voice. It's not us, it's them. And then, as though answering their confusion, the voice came again. This time, louder and clearer. It echoed through every hall, every room. It was not an enemy vessel or a fleet of warships, but the voice of Earth itself. You've mocked us long enough. It wasn't a threat. It was a declaration. The rookie admiral's earlier words had come to life. Humanity was no longer the underdog. Earth wasn't just reacting. It was retaliating with the cold, calculated precision of something that had been underestimated for far too long. They hadn't even responded with the power they truly possessed. No, Earth had simply shown the Council the reality of their mistake. The humming grew louder. The alien fleet had no chance to react. The once proud ships crumbled, their systems failing one by one as the human forces disabled their communication and propulsion networks. The alien ships began to drift, helpless in the void. We thought they were silent because they were weak, one of the council members whispered, his voice trembling. But they were silent because they didn't need to speak. They were waiting. As the alien ships continued to drift in space, the screens flickered once more, showing a last transmission from Earth. The final message was simple. They thought it was mercy. It wasn't. The council members stared at the screen, the realization dawning on them with crushing finality. They had been foolish, arrogant. They had thought Earth's silence was a weakness, a surrender. They had underestimated humanity's strength, its resolve. And now, in one swift, brutal act, they had lost everything. And that was before Earth even responded. The alien council sat in stunned silence, the walls of their vast chamber echoing with the weight of their collective realization. The very foundation of their empire was shaking. The fleet, their most powerful weapon, had been reduced to nothing in a matter of moments. The hum that filled the air had now turned into a low, rhythmic thrum, each pulse reverberating through the very bones of their space station. They had been so certain, so convinced of their superiority. Now they were witnessing their own destruction, at the hands of a planet they had so casually dismissed. What happened? One council member muttered, his voice hoarse as if the words were hard to escape. His wide, panicked eyes scanned the monitors, each one flashing with failure. Ships were gone, communication systems were disabled, and the entire fleet was in disarray. Another council member, his face twisted with a mix of disbelief and fury, stood and slammed his fist down on the table. How could this happen? We controlled the entire galaxy. Earth was nothing, a meaningless rock in the void. He turned toward the comm officer, his voice cracking. Tell me what went wrong." The comm officer, trembling, could barely meet his superior's eyes. He had tried everything, rebooting systems, bypassing security protocols. Nothing worked. His hands flew across the console, desperately trying to make sense of the chaos. It's like they ... They hacked into everything. Every system we control, they've overridden it. Our fleet, our communications, everything. A bitter silence fell over the room as the council members realized the depth of their mistake. They had never taken Earth seriously. The last few 100 years of their rule had been easy, and their arrogance had blinded them to the fact that Earth was a sleeping giant, not a forgotten child. Earth had been quiet for so long, but now they understood it was never silence born of weakness. A sudden alarm blared from one of the monitors, cutting through the heavy tension in the room. A new message, encrypted, had just arrived. The comm officer, his fingers shaking, scrambled to decrypt it. As he did, the council members leaned forward, eager for any scrap of information that could explain how Earth had come to possess this kind of power. When the message finally decoded, a single line of text appeared on the screen. "You have made a grave mistake." The room went cold. The words felt more like an omen than a message. They were simple, but the weight of them settled into the minds of the council. Earth had not only struck back, they were warning them. The alien empire had ignored humanity for too long, and now it was paying the price. "What does this mean?" The High Commander asked, his voice a low rasp. "Why did they not just destroy us outright? Why are they toying with us?" "They're not toying with us," one of the council members whispered, his face pale. "They're showing us mercy, in their own way." "Mercy?" The High Commander scoffed. "You call this mercy? We're losing everything." "Mercy," the council member repeated, almost as if to convince himself. "They're giving us a chance to understand, to realize how foolish we've been. They're not destroying us because they don't have to." The tension in the room was palpable. The walls felt as though they were closing in. The once proud alien empire, which had conquered countless worlds, was now trembling before a race it had dismissed as insignificant. The most unsettling part was that humanity hadn't even fired a shot. They hadn't needed to. All they had done was show the council that their technology was not invincible, that their power had limits. The COM officer, his hands now slick, with sweat, turned to the High Commander, his voice breaking through the stillness. "Sir, I don't know how to say this, but I've never seen anything like this before. They've locked us out. All systems, all channels, they're completely blocked. I can't access anything. We can't communicate with our fleet, our outposts, our allies. Earth has us isolated." The High Commander's face went white. "What do you mean isolated? You're telling me we're cut off?" The COM officer nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, sir, we're blind. They've completely severed us from the rest of the galaxy. We can't even send a distress signal. No communication. No backup." Another council member, one who had been silently observing, finally spoke up, his voice sharp with realization. "This isn't just a tactical move. Earth isn't just defending itself, they're sending a message. They're saying, we control the narrative now." He paused, his expression hardening. "They want us to understand the power we've overlooked. They've given us a taste of our own medicine." "That's not possible," another council member said, his voice cracking with panic. "We've spent centuries building this empire. How could they?" "They didn't need centuries," the High Commander interrupted, his voice sharp. "They used something we never even considered. Simplicity. A human trait we mocked for so long. We thought we were the superior ones, advanced, untouchable. But they saw something we didn't. They saw the power in being underestimated." The entire room fell into a heavy silence. They had been the giants of the galaxy, the rulers of space, the ones who dictated the flow of time itself. But they had forgotten one fundamental truth: the most dangerous enemies were the ones who knew when to wait, when to remain silent. They had never truly understood Earth because they had never given it the chance to speak. The High Commander finally exhaled, his voice quieter now, filled with resignation. "We've lost then. It's over." There was no answer. No one dared speak. Minutes passed, and the room seemed to grow colder, more suffocating. The reality was undeniable. The alien empire had been dealt a blow so devastating that it threatened to unravel everything they had built. Their fleets lay in ruins. Their communications were dead. And Earth, once dismissed as weak, had exposed the cracks in their seemingly invincible empire. Suddenly, the COM officer's voice broke through the silence, shaking. "Sir, we've just received another message from Earth. It's not a warning this time. It's a command." The High Commander's gaze hardened. "What is it?" The message appeared on the screen, simple but final. This is your last chance. Surrender, or you will be erased." The room fell into a tense silence once again, the meaning of the words sinking deep into every council member's soul. The silence that Earth had kept for centuries had now become a powerful weapon. They had waited, watched, and when the time was right, they had struck not with weapons, but with silence, cunning, and precision. The High Commander's voice was barely a whisper, but it held a strange sense of awe. And that was before Earth even responded. The High Commander paced back and forth, his mind a whirlwind of confusion and disbelief. The alien empire, once an unchallenged force in the galaxy, was now on the brink of collapse. Their systems were compromised, their fleets decimated, and their once invincible power shattered by a species they had long since deemed insignificant. Earth, the very planet they had mocked and underestimated, had risen from the silence with a force they never could have imagined. They can't be serious," one of the council members murmured, his voice trembling. "This can't be real." "They are," the High Commander snapped, his voice bitter and filled with anger. "They've shown us their power. They've beaten us, without lifting a finger. We were fools to think we could control them. Earth has outwitted us at every turn." The room was heavy with the weight of their defeat. The council members, who had once stood tall with their arrogance and pride, now looked like hollow shells, each one aware of how far they had fallen. The cum officer, who had been silent for what felt like hours, finally spoke up. "Sir, I've received another transmission," he said, his voice strained. "It's from Earth again. They've provided coordinates." "Coordinates?" The High Commander repeated, narrowing his eyes. "What for?" The cum officer hesitated, fingers trembling as he decoded the message. They're giving us one final choice. They want us to come to a specific location. They said we have 1 hour. If we don't arrive within that time, they'll destroy everything." The High Commander's heart sank. The audacity of Earth was beyond comprehension. They weren't just fighting back, they were forcing the Empire to beg for mercy. Why would they give us a chance? One of the council members asked, his voice barely audible. "Why not just finish us off?" "Because they're not interested in the quick kill," the High Commander muttered, his gaze distant. "They want us to feel every ounce of our failure. They want us to understand what it means to underestimate them. They've crushed us, and now they want to make sure we're fully aware of it. They want us to suffer." The room fell silent again. The council members exchanged glances, each one grappling with the reality of what had just happened. Their empire was no more, and all because they had dismissed Earth as weak. All because they had believed their own superiority would protect them from the inevitable. But now, humanity had turned the tables. They had shown the alien council what true power looked like. The cum officer's voice broke through the stillness. "Sir, they've transmitted a message along with the coordinates. It's a warning." "A warning?" the High Commander asked, his voice low. "What kind of warning?" The cum officer nodded and read the message aloud. "You thought you could erase us. You thought you could control us. But now you will understand the cost of your arrogance. We have waited, we have watched, and now we decide. Your empire is nothing. The silence ends here." The words hung in the air like a heavy fog, each syllable carrying the weight of their impending doom. The council members were no longer just defeated, they were humiliated. The empire that had ruled the galaxy with an iron fist was now at the mercy of a species they had once considered insignificant. The silence of Earth, which had once been a symbol of their weakness, had become their greatest weapon. One council member, his voice trembling with desperation, spoke up. "What do we do now? We've lost. There's no way to recover from this." The High Commander's face hardened. "We go to the coordinates. We face them head on. But what if it's a trap?" Another council member asked. What if they're waiting for us to come to them, only to destroy us completely? They already destroyed us completely, the High Commander replied, his tone bitter. There's nothing left to lose. The only thing we can do now is show them that we are still willing to fight. We go to them. We face whatever comes next. And we accept the consequences. The room fell silent again, the gravity of the situation settling over them like a heavy weight. The alien empire was on its knees, and there was no one left to help them. Their fleets were shattered, their power gone. They were completely alone in the galaxy, left to face the consequences of their own arrogance. For a moment, there was no sound except for the hum of the ship's failing systems. The High Commander stared out into the vast expanse of space, his mind racing. He had spent his entire life building this empire, watching it grow from a small force to a dominating power. And now it was all coming to an end. Not with a final, glorious battle, but with a whisper. A message from Earth, simple and devastating. The cum officer looked at him, his expression filled with uncertainty. Sir, the coordinates are set. The fleet is waiting for your orders. The High Commander's heart raced as he stood in front of the Council, his mind torn between the reality of their defeat and the need to hold on to some shred of pride. They had no chance of winning. Earth had already won. But he couldn't bring himself to surrender completely. Not yet. Set course for the coordinates, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. We'll face them, one last time. As the ship's engines roared to life, the alien fleet slowly began to move toward the coordinates Earth had provided. It was a journey toward certain defeat, but there was something in the High Commander's heart that refused to accept it. He had lost everything, but he would not go down without one final attempt to regain control. As the fleet approached the coordinates, the High Commander could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. Earth had shown them mercy, but that mercy was a double-edged sword. They had given the Empire one final chance to prove itself, and now it was time for the High Commander to decide what would be left of the alien Empire. The silence of Earth had shattered them. And now the Empire would face the consequences of their own actions, and that silence was just beginning. The alien fleet drifted toward the coordinates Earth had provided, every ship heavy with dread. The once proud armada, now a shadow of its former self, glided through space as if suspended in time. The hum of the engines seemed to echo in the High Commander's ears, a constant reminder that they were moving toward an inevitable end. There was no way to turn back, no way to salvage the Empire's crumbling legacy. The communication systems had been silent for hours. Every attempt to reach out to the rest of their forces had failed. They were utterly alone. Only the coordinates remained, pulling them forward. The High Commander stood at the front of the bridge, his eyes fixed on the distant horizon. His once unshakable confidence had eroded, replaced by a heavy sense of regret. How had they fallen? So far, how had they allowed themselves to become so blind? Behind him, the council members spoke in hushed tones, but no one had the courage to address the elephant in the room, the crushing weight of their defeat. Earth had not just beaten them. It had humiliated them. They had underestimated humanity in the most spectacular fashion, and now they were paying the price. We're almost there, the cum officer said, his voice tight with fear. The coordinates, they're within reach. The High Commander nodded slowly, unable to speak. What words could he offer? What could be said to undo the mistake they had made? All they had now was the final confrontation with Earth. Last chance for the Empire to preserve some semblance of dignity. As the fleet approached the coordinates, the screens in front of the High Commander flickered to life. The static cleared, revealing a sight that stopped his breath. There, in the vast expanse of space, was the human ship. It was massive, larger than anything the alien fleet had encountered. It dwarfed their ships by a factor of 10, its hull sleek and unmarked by the scars of battle. The human ship didn't just look like a warship. It exuded an aura of raw, untapped power. The High Commander could feel the presence of Earth in every inch of that ship, a reminder of how utterly powerless they were. The silence was deafening. For a moment, the High Commander felt as though the entire galaxy had paused, holding its breath. He could feel the weight of the universe bearing down on him, the realization that they were staring at the end of an era, the era of the Empire. "Should we hail them?" one of the council members asked, his voice shaky. "No," the High Commander replied, his voice hoarse. "Let them speak first." A few seconds later, a cold, unyielding voice filled the room, coming from the human ship. It was calm, precise, and full of authority. "Your arrogance has cost you everything. You thought you could erase us. You thought you could control the galaxy with force, but you were wrong." The High Commander clenched his fists, unable to respond. The words hit harder than any weapon. The human voice, once a symbol of weakness in the Empire's eyes, now sounded like a warning. They had miscalculated. They had underestimated Earth, and now they would pay the price. "You are not invincible," the voice continued. "You were never invincible. Earth has always been here, silent, watching, waiting." The words pierced the High Commander's heart. Earth had been waiting. They had been silent not out of fear, but because they were biding their time. They had seen the Empire's arrogance, its belief that it could control everything, and they had patiently waited for the moment to strike. "And now," the voice said, "you will understand the consequences of your silence." The screens went black. The voice was gone. The silence returned, but this time it was different. It wasn't the silence of a planet too weak to fight back. It was the silence of a species that had crushed its enemy without firing a shot, without ever needing to. The silence of victory. The High Commander stood there, his heart sinking with the realization that Earth had won not by brute force, but by outsmarting them, by taking control of the situation with a strategy they had never seen coming. The Empire had fallen not to an army, but to a mind. The cum officer spoke, his voice breaking the silence. "Sir, they've sent a final message." The High Commander nodded, bracing himself. He had no words left to say. The message appeared on the screen. "This is the end of your empire. This is the beginning of ours." And with that, the empire that had once ruled the galaxy crumbled into dust.